My wife, Chris, and I love dachshunds, these little long dogs. Now, every Doxy has his own personality, his own quirks and uniquenesses, and every Doxy is unmistakably a dachshund. They're all the same. Um, Chris and I, over the course of our 32 years married, have had four dachshunds. At one point, we had three at one time. Let me tell you about them. Gretel was our first, and she became grandma. We bred her several times. She was a smooth red, and she was demanding and uncooperative, and she always smelled like Fritos. I don't really know why. Gilligan was one of Gretel's pups. He was a black long hair. I loved Gilly. He was cuddly and friendly and playful, and he really was my best friend. And then there was Bonsai. Bonsai was Gretel's grandson. He came from a puppy that Gretel had. And Bonsai was a chocolate long hair. He was nervous and skittish, and he was constantly cleaning the other dogs. And Bonsai, more than any of our other doxies, just wanted to cuddle all day and all night with the other dogs or with a human being. And each one of these dogs had uniquenesses. And now I have little Samurai. He's down here at my feet right now as I'm recording, and Sammy is just the best. But each one is so unique, and yet there are things that every doxy has in common. If you've ever had doxies, you know what I'm talking about. The side eye, the zoomies, burrowing under the covers. Oh my gosh, do they love to roll up in a blanket? And the absolute refusal to obey or learn tricks. We've had four very different dogs, but one breed with obvious resemblance and commonality in within the breed. And in fact, I've really come to understand dachshunds better because we've lived with four different ones. And that brings me today to our theme for this new series, the Gospels. Four Gospels, four writers, four perspectives, but one Jesus. And if you've ever wondered why the Bible gives us four different accounts of Jesus's life, death, and resurrection instead of one account, one unified account, today I'm going to answer that question as I launch a brand new series called Meeting Jesus. Thank you for joining me today. Welcome to Bible for Newbies. I'm Russ Michaels. I'm a pastor, an author, and a worship leader from Bozeman, Montana, and I love the Bible. I'm so glad you're here. This podcast is for you if you're new to reading the Bible, or if you've been reading for a while and you want to go deeper. My goal is to help untangle the confusing stuff so your Bible reading feels rewarding and life-giving, not frustrating or overwhelming. One of Jesus' disciples, Peter, wrote that the scriptures are like light shining in a dark place. I think reading the Bible is like flipping your headlights to high beam when you're driving on a dark country road. Suddenly, things get clearer, you can see the road ahead and avoid the ditches. So come take a ride with me, and let's turn on the light. All right, today I'm launching a new series. And as you probably know, I've been doing a series called Did You Know That's in the Bible? And I'm not really done with that series. I'm going to come back to that one again and again and pick up those episodes from time to time. It's kind of a topical, fun series. But I've been wanting to do a series on the Gospels for some time, and this week I just decided now is the time. And I want to go back to the foundation of everything that Christianity is based on. And so for the next, 12 or so episodes, and I may interrupt them from time to time, I want to spend some time on these first four books of the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And in these books, in these Gospels, we're going to meet Jesus. I'm hoping that we don't just learn facts about Jesus or try to solve theological riddles. That's not my focus here. We're going to spend some time getting to know Jesus as he is revealed in these four Gospels. I want to start with this. What is a gospel? It's a pretty familiar word, I think, to lots of us, but you might not really know what the word means in its technical sense. Most of us think of gospel as as the name of one of these four books or as a genre of biblical literature, because Matthew is called the Gospel of Matthew and Mark is called the Gospel of Mark, and so on. But the word didn't come from a genre of literature. Our English word gospel comes from an Old English word, actually Godspell, meaning good news or good story. God is Old English for good. Spell is like if you tell a spell, it's a story. So Godspell means good story or good news. But long before English existed, the New Testament used a Greek word, and it's the word evangelion. I don't think I'm saying that right, but we get our word evangelism or evangelist from this word. It actually means good news, just like God's spell, good news in the Greek. And as the Greeks would use this word, it meant the announcement of a great victory or the arrival of a new king. And so when the earliest Christians talked about the gospel, they weren't talking about one of these books of the Bible. They didn't even have a Bible yet. They were announcing something that had happened. God's kingdom had broken into the world. Jesus had lived and died, and he had risen from the dead. Jesus had been declared King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That was the gospel or the good news. And eventually, in the first century, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these accounts of Jesus's life came to be called Gospels because each one tells that same good news through the story of Jesus. Now, I sometimes refer to the Gospels as biographies of Jesus because, well, they tell his story. But there is kind of a technical problem with calling these books of the Bible biographies, because the gospel writers weren't really trying to write biographies in the way we think of biographies today. I love reading biographies. I not long ago I read the biography of Alexander Hamilton. I'm right now reading the biography of the first lieutenant governor of the state of Montana. His name was Marr, and I love biographies. But if somebody writes your biography, they're going to tell you the year you were born and where you went to school and the jobs you had, the things that are interesting and how you changed history. And they're going to tell your life in chronological order. That's how biographies are written. But the gospel writers weren't trying to answer the questions that modern biographies ask. They were answering a much bigger question. Who is Jesus? And so every miracle, every conversation, every teaching moment, every story, everything these writers include is helping to answer that one question. Who is Jesus? And so what we find in these four gospels, these four accounts, is sometimes they arrange events differently because strict chronology isn't the writer's highest priority. Helping us meet Jesus and encounter him and know him and understand who he is what their priority is. And so to see what I mean, my mind turned to my own backyard. Now, if you live in southwestern Montana, I know lots of my listeners do, you've probably been to Yellowstone dozens of times. But if you live somewhere else in the world, you probably know just one thing about Yellowstone. You know Yellowstone is where you see Old Faithful. But when Chris and I have people come to visit us, we've got relatives coming in about a month, we're very excited, we don't spend the whole day standing around one geyser in Yellowstone National Park. We will take them all over the park to see different things. We usually start in Mammoth Hot Springs. It's at the northern entrance to the park. Mammoth Hot Springs is this incredible hot spring that covers acres of land. And over the centuries, the hot springs have just built up these silica deposits to make this beautiful, beautiful white formation. And there's water running over parts of it that turn the formations yellow and green, and there's all this color and there's steam, and it's just incredible. But it's not the first thing you think of when you think of Yellowstone National Park. And then we like to travel east from Mammoth into the Lamar Valley because that's where we look for wildlife. And on a good day, we'll see massive herds of bison or maybe elk or coyotes. Sometimes we'll see wolves. We've even seen bears over in that part of the park. But my favorite part of the park to take people to is the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. And I bet if you've never visited Yellowstone, you probably didn't even know that Yellowstone National Park has a Grand Canyon. It's this incredible canyon that is carved out of the limestone and this beautiful yellow rock. And there's the Yellowstone River that has carved this incredible valley down in the bottom of the canyon. And at the front of the canyon is the lower falls of the Yellowstone, this spectacular fall. And in fact, if you're watching me on YouTube, I've got a picture of both Old Faithful and the canyon, or the falls of the canyon right behind me. It's my favorite part of the park, but most people don't even know those other parts of the park are there. And the reality is Yellowstone is so much bigger than Old Faithful. And the reality is you can't experience Yellowstone in just one stop. And so in the same way, you can't fully appreciate Jesus through just one author's perspective. And so that's why God gave us four. Let me tell you, I just want to give you a snapshot in this episode of the four Gospels. And then in my next four episodes, we'll take a deeper dive into each one of the four Gospels. Let me tell you about each one just succinctly in this episode. Let's start with Matthew, because that's the first one. Matthew begins his account of Jesus with a genealogy, and that tells you exactly what he's trying to do. Matthew is writing primarily for Jewish readers, and he wants his readers to see that Jesus is the Messiah that was promised by the Old Testament prophets, that Jesus is the son of David, the ancient king of Israel, and that everyone has been waited for this Messiah. And throughout the Gospel of Matthew, the author keeps pointing back to the Old Testament and showing that Jesus fulfills all of God's promises. Matthew is awesome. Now, Mark is the shortest gospel, and it moves really at a breakneck pace. In Mark's gospel, Jesus is constantly on the move. He's teaching and healing and serving and confronting evil. But another major theme in Mark that I think is fascinating is that this Messiah, Jesus, is completely unexpected. And Mark highlights this. Over and over, people misunderstand who Jesus really is. And it's not just the crowds of people, but Mark portrays the fact that even the disciples struggle to understand him. And Mark wants us, his readers, to discover that God's king is revealed most clearly, not by taking up a sword, but by laying down his life. That's the Gospel of Mark. Now, Luke's Gospel. I hate to say I have a favorite, but I love Luke's Gospel. Luke was a really careful historian, but he was especially interested in the people that everybody else overlooked and that Jesus saw. Maybe that's why I really love this gospel. Luke highlights the times when Jesus gives special attention to women or to really poor people or the Samaritans and the Gentiles that were rejected by the Jews and anybody else that was on the margin of society. Luke reminds us that Jesus didn't come for just a select group of people. Jesus came to bring good news to everyone. Yeah, I really love Luke. John is really different from the other three. And John's gospel doesn't begin with a genealogy like Matthew. It doesn't begin with Bethlehem like Luke. It doesn't even begin with John the Baptist. John goes back to before creation, and he says, in the beginning. It echoes the book of Genesis. In the beginning was the Word, according to John. And John wants us to see that Jesus is more than a great teacher or a miracle worker. He is the eternal Son of God who became human. We have this beautiful verse in John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, talking about Jesus. John also contains the famous I am statements of Jesus, like I am the bread of life and I am the door and so on. And there's also these incredible miraculous signs that John says reveal who Jesus really is. So to answer the question, why are there four gospels? The answer is simple. It's because just like my dachshunds, each writer shines a light on a different facet of Jesus. Each one of my little personality of dog shines a facet on the breed of dachshund. And so we see a different facet of Jesus through each writer. Matthew says, meet the King. Mark says, this Messiah is unexpected. Luke says, I want you to meet the Savior for everyone. John says, I want you to meet the eternal Son of God. And so we have four writers and four portraits, but one Jesus, one Savior. And each gospel asks us to answer a question. Who is Jesus? Each writer helps us to see something that the others didn't necessarily emphasize. Now, throughout this series, I'm going to keep coming back to this one simple question. Look at each individual gospel, and then we're going to go back to the themes of the gospels. I'm going to keep asking this question. What does this writer want us to see about Jesus? And sometimes I'll ask a question like this. What would first century readers have understood immediately that we can easily miss? Because remember, these gospels weren't written to us. They were written for us for sure, but they were written to readers in the first century. And they would have seen things that we could really overlook or misunderstand. Sometimes we're going to be looking for those echoes of the Old Testament, especially in Matthew. And sometimes we're just going to ask why Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John chose to tell this story the way they did. And in each episode, we're going to finish with this question. It's an important question. What is God asking me to do with this revelation of Jesus? Because the Gospels are never satisfied with simply giving us information. They lead us into transformation. Today, as I was researching, I came across a quote by a Bible scholar by the name of Ray Lubeck. And he says that the Gospels are very different from any other ordinary biography, and I really believe that he's right. A biography simply tells you about somebody's life. It's just information. And the Gospels really do tell us about the life of Jesus, but they're trying to do something so much bigger. They're inviting us to see God differently, to understand ourselves differently, and to see the world differently because of what Jesus has done. And ultimately, the Gospels ask every reader an unavoidable question. What are you going to do with Jesus? And I hope as you listen to these episodes, and if you choose to read the Gospels with me, I hope you will ask yourself that question. What are you going to do with Jesus? We're not just going to be gathering information. We're going to be walking into an invitation to receive. So today I want to end by inviting you to begin reading one of the Gospels. I've given you a little overview of all four, and you can start with any one you like, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. It doesn't matter to me which one you want to start with. If you're more familiar with one gospel, maybe you want to read one of the gospels that you haven't read quite as often. Or if you're a complete newbie, if you've never read the gospels, by all means, start with Matthew and go in order. But my invitation to you is that over the course of this series, I hope you'll read all four with me. And as you read, I want to invite you to watch for a few key ideas. And I hope you can just remember these things. And if you have an opportunity to jot these down, it'll help you as you read. If you decide to start with Matthew, watch for the words king and kingdom, because Matthew is all about the fact that Jesus is the king that was prophesied. So watch for those words. When you're reading the Gospel of Mark, watch for the word immediately and pay attention to Jesus in action. It's really cool. When you're reading Luke, notice the people that everyone else overlooks. You're going to see Jesus just loving on and paying attention to people that in the first century were on the margins of society, and pay attention to how kind and generous and merciful Jesus is to those people that in first century Israel were overlooked or even disregarded. And if you're reading the Gospel of John, there's so much you could get out of John. Here's what the assignment I want to give you. Pay attention to Jesus's great I am statements. In a lot of translations, those words I am will be capitalized. And there's some good stuff to learn from those statements. But as you read, and I hope you will, don't worry about understanding everything. Just keep reading. I'm not going to give you a schedule to keep. You don't have to try to get this done in so many weeks. Just read at your own pace. You can read quickly or slowly, chapter by chapter or chunk by chunk, or you could read an entire book in one sitting if you want to. I just want to invite you to spend time with Jesus in the Gospels. And I will meet you back here in the next episode when we talk about the Gospel of Matthew. Together, we will continue meeting with Jesus. Thanks for turning on the light with me today here on Bible for Newbies. If something in this episode brought clarity or gave you something new to think about, would you share it with a friend? You never know who else might need that same bit of light. And if you're listening on a platform where you can leave a rating or a comment, that helps more people find the podcast. And I read every comment you leave. So that's it for today. Until next time, keep walking in the light.